first of all, thank you for everybody here who agreed to come and be a part of this and get us started again. I think you all know this group began officially, I think, in 2015. We have a standing committee called the Citizens Implementation Committee, whose purpose is to implement our comprehensive plan. And that group on an annual basis prioritizes certain goals from our comp plan through some strategic planning exercises. And it usually involves members of our town board, members of some of our other boards, like our planning board and our environmental conservation board, staff, and they come together and they decide what's the most important things we need to focus on in the coming year. And at the end of that, sometimes some of the goals are so specific that we decide we need groups to focus on them beyond just our existing boards. So that's how this group was created the first time around in 2015. And their initial goal is, or their initial task was just to research conservation easements in general. And one of the handouts I gave you guys through email, and if it's the printed packet, it's the one on the top, is their report that they presented to the town board at the end of their initial meeting. I think they met for about a year. This report was from October 2015. And I don't know if any of you had a chance to kind of look through it, but you can see that they developed some short-term and long-term goals and some overall kind of ideas that they felt the town should consider when thinking about preserving and conserving land in the town. Can I?
Sure.
Come back.
So, thank you. So after that initial year in 2015, there has been some progress. Some of the things they talked about, like there's something in here called TDR. We'll get into that in the future. We haven't done a whole lot with that. It's a method of preserving land that involves incentivizing developers, and in return, they get, maybe greater density than they would be allowed to, but they have to pay into what we call a bank, a land bank. And then the town can use money in that bank to preserve land elsewhere, kind of like a mitigation strategy. We don't currently do that. But a couple of years ago, a planning firm out of New York City got a grant and used the town of Canandaigua as an example and created a TDR, which is Transfer of Development Rights report for us. So we have a report that kind of tells us how we could do that if we wanted to, but again, we haven't done anything with that. Some of the things we have done include protecting farmland. I think the town's done a pretty good job of showing that we find farmland to be valuable and we don't want it to disappear. We worked with the state for most of that and our local land trust, the Finger Lakes Land Trust, to help preserve several farms in the town. I don't have a big map of it, but this map here, there is no one on Zoom, shows, it's outdated, but the purple on this map are all farms that have been preserved permanently. They have conservation easements placed on them, so they're never ever going to be allowed to be developed for any other purpose than for farming. The owners retain ownership, but they can't sell it to someone who wants to put homes on it, for example, and they can't divide it in 10 pieces and give their kids 3 to build houses on. It has to be retained for farming forever. They can develop their farming operation on it further. They can build new barns. They can expand their operations for farming, but they can never develop it for non-farm uses. They can sell it though, but whoever buys it also has to adhere to the rules of the conservation easement. So this one's from 2017. You can see we've got a couple down at the southern end, but most of them are up here. Since this map was created, we've got several more parcels over here that are also protected. They didn't close till after this map was done. So we've been pretty successful with farming as far as conserving farmland. But in the last couple years, thankfully, there's been a renewed interest in looking at other types of land cover that are worth preserving. And the town board and the other boards and other groups in the some of our other volunteer groups, people are starting to say, well, what about those kinds of things? What about forests? What about other non-farming types of land cover? What about water quality protection? How can we do that? And so we started having a lot of conversations about renewing this group. And in 2020, this conservation group and some of you here started meeting again and focused on conservation subdivision regulations, which a developer can build a conservation subdivision in. If they buy a parcel, again, it's another incentivized program where they can maybe have greater density, but they have to set aside some undeveloped land on that parcel and preserve it. And in the past, there wasn't, and Chuck, you're more familiar with this, you can correct me if I say something wrong, but there wasn't as much information in our code the way that they did conservation subdivisions that really helped us and the developer conserve really valuable land. There's some land you can't build on anyway. Maybe it's too steep, maybe there's a wetland on it, but I think that was about as far as the restrictions went. But what we wanted to do is make sure that if they're going to use a conservation subdivision in our code, that they really look at which part they're preserving and why, and is it important? And so now this group helped go through that. We hired a consulting firm, Labella Associates, to help us really dig into what would actually do the work. What can we change in that code to help ensure that when a developer uses that regulation, that they're really preserving worthwhile land, that they'll look at the ecosystems, they'll look at what's there. If it's a forest, what's growing, what kind of forest? And we do have maps that show all that. Where is it? This one, oh, behind Chuck over there, we have forests of all of our ecological communities. We also have up here, this just focused on forest cover, but that one shows all the land covers. And in the same year that they did the conservation subdivision regulations, we also adopted an updated natural resources inventory for the town, which shows, basically looks at all of our land covers, everything we have, and identifies what it is, and why you might want to conserve that, or, if it's successional forest, what's it going to turn into, all that kind of stuff. So we have some better tools to use with our developers, especially now if they do conservation subdivision. And after this group got done working on that, they kind of took a break. So here we are, and I have a tendency to talk a lot, I'm sorry. But during last fall's strategic planning session, there were several items that came up that were all related. Basically, preserve land, try and keep development off of farmland, more, protect more important land that has, the natural resources that we have identified as being worthwhile. So when I printed these 4 pages, these are 2 of the goals from our comprehensive plan that deal with land covers that are important, agriculture and natural resources. And I printed these out because these are not necessarily just the main priorities, but it's everything that this group would have any interest in. And I'm not going to go through it all, that would take too long today. But we've got measurables, ways that we can see that if we're doing a good job of these, of protecting this, or if where we need to work on it. And then like in the natural resources, our environmental conservation board spent a lot of time helping to identify action steps that would help us preserve natural resources. So, you know, we decided it was time to kind of reinvigorate this group and focus more on how can we actually make this happen. We know what we've done. We know what we've tried. We have a list of things we haven't tried yet. But then there's also programs that I don't know about, we don't know about. And so that's kind of where I think this group could go. And I know that's very broad and general, but I'm hoping that as we begin to meet this year, we can dive into some of the things we've done that worked, some of the things that we haven't tried, and hopefully you guys can help us come up with some new ideas. I've talked a lot, I apologize. So I'll let you guys do some talking.
You should probably touch on, for those that aren't familiar with the Barnum/Vista project and
Sure.
how that partnership worked out as far as
Yeah.
preserving land.
Yeah, so most of you might be familiar with the Finger Lakes Land Trust and the Genesee Land Trust are two of the local land trusts that work in our area. And the Finger Lakes Land Trust has been very active in the town. When you have a conservation easement on a piece of property, there's usually someone who is the holder of the easement. So it's the person who's responsible, or the entity who's responsible for making sure that that easement is protected and that the people who own it don't do what they're not supposed to on the easement. So for a lot of these purple parcels, actually all the ones on this map that are protected, the Finger Lakes Land Trust holds those easements, and those are all farmland. But a couple of years ago, they reached out to us about some land that used to be a farm off of Jones Road in the town. It's one of our higher points in the town. It's down here. So it's up really high. Amanda Park is here. So the water that comes from that area flows into Barnes Gully and eventually into the lake. There's a family that owned, I don't know what their total acreage was, but the land trust, with the help of the town, purchased about 100 acres or so. And through a combination of outright purchasing and some conservation easements on land that the owners retained, they created kind of a nature reserve that's also open to the public for hiking, and it's called the Canandaigua Vista Nature Preserve. If you haven't been there and you like that sort of thing, I highly recommend it. Actually just went there last week. So it's two things really. It's one, it's a place for the public to visit. It's got some beautiful views of the lake. And it gets, you know, people interested or out there to see what they're working on. But two, it's also protecting the resources. So the land trust not only has this easement, it has trails, but they're also working on restoring the land cover. They're trying to get rid of invasive species. They're managing the center's kind of old farm fields that have grown up. So they're going to manage that. They're going to keep it open so that the views are retained. And they've done some water quality improvement projects on the property too. There's a pond for retaining runoff, let it settle before it enters the creek. Because really the start of Barnes Gully is up in that area. So there's a lot of.
Does the land trust do all that management?
Yes. So the town's role in that project was funding. We provided $100,000 to help them purchase it. But they own some of the land, and then they also hold easements on some of the other land. And so we don't maintain any of it. I think in the winter we help plow their parking lot, and that's about it.
So if they I'm assuming this is transfer of development rights. If they took somebody's property that is heavily forested, and would they become the manager, or would the property owner be the manager with the land trust overseeing that?
It depends on the agreement. So easements can be written differently based on what the goal is, and easement language can be drafted a whole different number of ways. If they were to do something like that on a piece of property that has a timber management plan, say the person has forests and they want to continue to manage that stand for lumber production, They could still, if that's what the easement allows, but there's probably a requirement to have an actual management plan written up that's signed by a forester, that's responsible and sustainable, otherwise they probably wouldn't enter into an easement with them. I would imagine, like, you know, clear cutting wouldn't be allowed under something like that. But yeah, the Vista project is a great example of how easements and this sort of programming can work really well. That's a combination of purchase and easements, but it worked really nicely.
So with this property you're just talking about on Jones Road, did the property owners contact you and say, this is what we want to do? Or
I
how do
think
you?
the land trust actually reached out to them.
The land trust.
Actually, Duana
Did she?
Barnum came to those meetings back in 2015, and her husband or her significant other, I'm trying to think what his name is, but she embraced conservation, and I think the property had been in the family
A
forever.
long time, yeah.
Okay, so it was like an educational thing. They came
Yeah,
and
we-
heard
we-
about it because I'd never heard about it.
Had a number of meetings and invited,
been
I
a-
forget what the threshold was, but we invited anybody that had more than X number of acres.
Oh,
And
yeah.
had a
okay.
little dog and pony show, and guy from the land trust was there.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, it was a long process. So see that map up there that says lands of conservation value?
Mhm.
If you look down towards the bottom left where that dark blue section is.
Yep.
Those parcels that became the Vista project are within that dark blue, and on that map, dark blue means it has a very high value as far as conservation rating goes. And it is weighted for acreage, so parcels that are larger naturally got higher rating because it's better bang for your buck if you can purchase a 150-acre parcel rather than a 5-acre parcel. But other factors went into it, and I don't know if you can read it, but does it have a natural or agricultural land cover? Basically, is it undeveloped? Does it have any steep slopes? Does it have any wetlands or floodplains? Is it near a stream corridor? And is it visible from Canandaigua Lake? So those factors went into rating all the parcels in Canandaigua, the town of Canandaigua. So the land trust has similar maps of their own. And we met with them after we created our open space master plan. And they said, you know, it's really nice to see that you guys are valuing the same things we were, because they were already looking at those parcels too. So there's a lot of things to consider when we look at where we want to preserve, but at least we have some starting points that we can use.
And there's money.
There is money. Yeah, I just checked with our finance person this morning. So the town, one of my handouts I gave you is something that our town manager created. Doug, he was the chair of this committee for the last several years. And he and I were talking over the last few years about improving our conservation programming, which kind of doesn't really exist. You know, we don't have someone that comes to us and says, well, I want to preserve my land. We don't have like a handout we can give to them and say, well, here's your options. So, you know, we'd like to. And this was something he made earlier this year to kind of give us an idea. How do we do it? What are our options? What are we allowed to do? And what might that look like? And so I took his matrix and I added some examples across the bottom. So all these different ways that you might preserve land, some of them we actually have already, and some of them we've never done before. I'm sorry, I forgot your question. I get excited and I just start talking.
Money.
Yes, so we have, thank you. In the town's budgeting, we have something called,
It's the grease.
Mhm.
it is. How do I forget that? I don't know. We have something called an open space reserve fund. When we protect farmland through the state farmland protection program, it's something we call our PDR. You might hear that come up. What it stands for is purchase of development rights. Basically, it's the ones that are in purple. Basically, it's it's taking away the landowner's right to develop, so they get a financial incentive to do that. So it's, you're purchasing them, basically you're putting an easement on their land, they can't ever develop, they get a financial incentive for that. We do that through the state, so the state takes the larger burden of cost, but the town still pays into that from our own money, and it's not much, it's $50 per acre. It's an agreement that the town board made years ago. So for all of those purple parcels, plus the ones that are up near the top, that's what the town paid in. Once the easement was closed, the town paid $50 per acre for each of those. And that comes out of something called our Open Space Reserve Fund. It's not automatically funded. There's nothing that just automatically goes into it every year. At the end of the year, if we have unexpended fund balance, I'm not finance, I don't really know what that means, but basically leftover money, the town board can choose to put some of that into this open space reserve fund, and they have been. So before the Canandaigua Vista project was created, in anticipation of that, the town board put money into the open space reserve fund, and that's where the $100,000 came from that we gave to the land trust. That's where the $50 per acre for these farmland easements comes from. If we purchase land that we want to preserve, we can use that money for that.
Is that where the land next to McJanet Park?
It may come from there. It, depending on, it could potentially come out of the parks fund. We have another fund for our parks that we can use to purchase new parkland or improve existing parkland. So that one, I'm not sure how that'll work. It's kind of on the fence, but yes, it could potentially. There are rules from the state for these reserve funds, how they can be used. But yeah, there's money. Right now, there's $1.35 million in it.
That's from the assessment in terms of new residences.
Not the
that's it.
open space fund. No, the town board just puts money into it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. You haven't gotten that.
That's the park and rec fee.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So the parks fund is automatically built up every time a new home is built. There's a fee assessed on it that they pay when they come into the development office to get a permit to build the house, and it's $1,000, and it goes into our parks fund. So if a developer builds, you know,
A new lot on a new home on a vacant lot.
Yes,
If
thank
it's a
you, Chuck.
replacement, then. Yeah, they don't pay.
yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Chuck is the chair of our planning board. So he
He knows
knows
all.
lots of things.
Don't put that burden.
I said,
Anyway, yeah, the assessment is something we've collected, required of all developers.
Yeah.
When they want to put a new structure, residential structure on a vacant lot. And it's currently $1,000.
Yeah.
Per lot.
I have talked a whole lot, and I could continue to talk, but I don't want to do that. I know you guys probably have questions. But what can
So
I
Sarah, the
answer?
goal of this committee, is it to look at our land conservation value map and prioritize areas that we
I think
like to go after and figure out ways to either
eventually.
control them through easements or?
Right, I think eventually, yes, but I think before we get there, what I'd like us to do is kind of figure out, well, if we got those, what would we do? How would we obtain it? Where would the money come from? What would a program look like? You know, so we talk about, you know, the parks fund, there's $1,000 that goes into that with a new house that's built. We don't have anything like that for open space money. Right now, it's dependent on the town board putting unexpended funds into it at the end of each year. You know, maybe that's one of the things we look at. This group can make recommendations through our Citizens Implementation Committee to the town board. And so maybe a goal of ours, but it eventually is to make a recommendation that says that maybe there's an idea for something that automatically funds the open space fund, because yes, Tom's right, it's money. At the end of the day, sure, all those blue parcels would be great if we could buy a bunch of forest land and stuff and preserve it, put trails on it. but we have to have money for it. And if we do that, $1 million goes away really fast. So that was one of my ideas is, can we come up with some sort of a recommendation where there's money flowing in to a fund like that, that's not just dependent on the town board. Now, of course, they have to agree to do that and approve it, but
Is there such a thing as a municipal land trust? I know we have Genesee and Finger Lakes.
No,
Do municipalities ever develop their own land trust for their
we can
own
do
area?
the things that they do, but no, we're not a land trust. We can't be a land trust. But we do hold our own easements. All of those purple ones, one of them, we actually hold the easement. We just closed on it last December. So from now until forever, every year, I will go visit that farm and make sure they're still doing what they're supposed to and not doing anything they're not supposed to. So we do some of the same work as land trusts. We just historically haven't, and historically towns don't do as much of that as the land trusts. In looking around in other municipalities in the state, there are some that do it.
So it's not against state municipal law.
No, we
That's
can do this. We can purchase land for the purpose of, preserving it. We can hold easements on private land if we want to. Yeah,
That's just another burden for
exactly.
Sarah
Yeah.
or Jim or whoever.
Can you
It has
create
to
open
be the
space
policeman.
districts, similar, you have sewer districts, water districts?
Probably.
There you would be funded through, tax rolls or a special, line item on your tax bill that everyone would be paying into that fund.
Right. Yeah, we could. I mean, the whole town could be one.
Because I think it's the best interest of all our residents to have, the open space preserved.
Yeah, so we recently, the town board recently adopted a scenic view shed overlay district on certain portions of the town. Basically, that map up there that says, well, if you can't read it from here, it says scenic view sheds.
Purple.
And all the purple
Purple
is
map.
land that can be viewed from some point on Canandaigua Lake. I can't remember where the point is. And so we have an overlay district now, so that if someone wants to build a house or something in their parcel falls in the purple, now they have to answer a bunch of questions, and there's restrictions on where they can put their house, and you probably know more about it than I do.
And it's a 1 acre lot minimum,
Minimum lot size.
Yep. Reserved hardwood forest.
Yeah, so there is a precedent for creating a district that has rules based on the landscape and what it, we've talked about doing things like that for farmland and also for non-farmland, like forested land. And that's kind of why this map up here has a big orange bubble that happens to kind of go around all that green down there at the southern end of the town, which is all of our main forested parts of the town. And when we drew that line, the goal was just to have a target area. So it's called our strategic, what is it? Strategic Forest Protection Area. Now, does it do anything? No, not a thing. It doesn't do anything at all. It's just there. But the idea is that if we designate it, then we could do something with it. Maybe that becomes some sort of an overlay district where there's rules if you want to build in there. So that's what I mean, as you can see, we kind of have bits and pieces of plans for conserving, but we don't have anything solid. And yeah, if you come to me or to come to a town manager and say, I have 25 acres and I'd like to preserve it forever, how do I do that? Right now, we could give you a list of some random programs we know about, but I'd like to be able to have some sort of a solid package that we can say, here's all the programs, do any of these work for you? And we don't have anything that the town, we ourselves could offer someone financially to incentivize that. We rely on grant programs, which are great, but they're never a guarantee. So, maybe that's one of the things we do. Could we develop something, albeit probably smaller than maybe a state grant, but could we say, oh, sure, well, we could put an easement on it and there's X number of dollars that would go in per acre to do that. We don't have anything like that right now. So we have ideas, we know we have important land cover that we want to preserve, but beyond farmland, we don't really have any established programs. And that's one of the questions is, do we want one? What might that look like? How could we do it?
When I mentioned an open space district, I was thinking more of a funding source.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I went off,
Yeah,
but
well,
just
and the whole town would be in the district
Mhm.
essentially, and everyone who lives in the town would pay into it. And there'd have to be somebody to administer it too, with
Yeah.
town staff or an authority set up. But that would help on the funding side, of course. And you wouldn't be relying on town board allocating money each year, because here you'd have a steady flow and you could budget accordingly, but it's legal to do in New York. I know New York's pretty tough on what you can assess.
Yeah,
My recollection is one of the proposals back was that to split up the $1,000 and do 500 for parks and $500 for open space, but it didn't go anywhere.
no, it didn't. I mean, but that's one of the ideas. And then the question is, what triggers it? Is it the same as the $1,000 for parks? Is it just an additional fee, whether it's $500 or $1,000 on top of that, that goes into a fund for open space? Or is it, what generates it?
Again, the state, as you said, is real touchy about what the parkland fund can be used for and what the open space fund can be used for. But back then, we didn't have $1.3 million in the fund. So the town board has been doing what, $100,000 the last few years anyways.
Yeah,
Yeah,
in there, ballpark.
Can money be transferred from parks to open space and vice versa?
I don't think
No.
so.
no. So you
No,
gotta have
because
a
the
separate
parks fund is very restricted. It can only be used to purchase new parkland or improve an existing
Existing.
park. So if money in the open space fund is used to, purchase a conservation easement on private property that's never going to be a park, you couldn't use park fund money for that.
So in to purchase or take over a open space that a landowner has, but that landowner wants an income from it. Is there the capability of paying X number of dollars per year to have I imagine it's like a TDR of some sort.
Typically, they're
Can it
done
be an
at-
installment plan, I guess?
I don't know. What my experience so far has been is that it's a lump sum at closing. And then beyond that, there isn't anything else except for New York State does have some tax credits available. When you file your taxes, if you have a conservation easement of a certain size, I don't know what all the restrictions are, but you can get up to a $5,000 credit based on what you paid in property taxes. It's like 25% back up to $5,000. So, and that's every year. if
So
you
this is
file it.
stuff you want to get out,
Exactly.
the information that you want to get out to people.
Yeah, I mean, and I actually started something like that. It's just a front and back. But again, it's only what we've already done or what we know about. It's just a 2-pager. I don't think I emailed this to you guys, but I can. I threw it together to see what it would look like if we tried to show people what they can do, but it's limited, If a landowner comes to the town and they want to preserve their land, they
Is this the
can.
one for landowners in
Did
the town?
I did give it to you, yes.
Okay.
But you'll see most of it is dependent on grant programs,
Mhm.
which are not consistent and they're not guaranteed. And they're
They-
very, very time consuming.
They really named it FPIG.
Yes, they sure did.
It's an acronym for
Farmland Protection Implementation Grant.
Okay.
That's what we refer to as our PDR, because in essence, it is a purchase of the development rights of the land. Yeah, so this is what it looks like, which is basically, hey, here's what you can do with us. We will work with someone else to try and make this happen. I'd like for there to be a little bit more on what you can do directly with the town. Again, I don't think it would ever be as much money as what would come from the state, unless it was outright purchasing the property. But,
One of the things we could do is identify a handful of landowners that have desirable property and spring some sort of marketing sheet to them and see, see if it has any effect.
we do that, or well, in the past, when the state opened up their grant window for the FPIG, we, about a year ahead of that, we typically would send out letters to landowners who own active farmland in the town, and say, hey, we have this program with the state. Here's what it's about. Would you be interested in doing that? If we think your land is, falls underneath these categories, we'll apply on your behalf. And it worked. We got people who come in, and I don't know if some of you may be familiar with the process, but say we got like 10 landowners who said they were interested in it. Our agricultural committee and our environmental conservation board would then take a look at all of them together in a joint meeting and rank them. And we, in the past, sometimes would, involve the land trust, and they'd pick the number one and we'd pick the number two, and we'd both send out an application to the state. And sometimes we were successful and sometimes we weren't. But the state changed their program last year. And in some ways it made it easier, but in some ways it's a lot harder. Their criteria is a bit stiffer with soil types and acreage and what they're doing on that acreage. So in this last round, we didn't submit anything because the two landowners that had made it to the top of the ranking no longer met the requirements of the state program. Because the rules had changed. And then I had to go back and say, I'm sorry, I don't have anything for you right now. So that's why I say it's inconsistent. I don't know. We did talk to the state and told them this was harder than it was before, and we didn't like their new rules. They've gotten complaints from other people around the state. I don't know if they'll change it again, but they may not. It just makes it a little harder on our end to really pick through the interested landowners to see what's actually going to work. For example, some of the requirements are that it has to have 60% active production. So, if they have 200 acres, they only farm half of it. It doesn't matter how nice that acreage is or how much woods it's got and how great farmers they are. They wouldn't be able to do the program. Or say they have 100 acres and it's all farmed and they're successful and they've got great production. If the soil types aren't the right soil types, doesn't matter. They don't meet the.
I would venture to say there isn't a farmer in Ontario County that doesn't know what the PDR program is.
Oh, I agree.
It's a bonanza for the farmer.
Yeah, I agree.
That's education is.
Especially as they get older.
Amen. They
Right,
can't,
yeah.
they cash out and they keep their
And
land.
they keep their land, right?
Couldn't have a better retirement program.
Yeah, well, and it keeps it in farming and it doesn't become
Well,
housing
it
development.
keeps it from being developed, not necessarily farming.
No, they have to farm it. They can't let it fallow.
I think it can't be subdivided, but they, as you said, they can sell it. And it can be other than farmland. It can just revert to successional
I
forest.
don't think it can.
I think you'll find out. It can't.
I
Is
think ag and
solar,
markets would disagree, but
is solar farming allowed under the PDR?
it
Is that-
can be allowed. Yes, it's
So
not
once
an
you got your-
automatic out.
So once you get your PDR and you got your money, you can turn it into a solar farm.
Not the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
There's some restrictions. It used to be that it would just be out, but they are willing to consider it now. If you already have solar on portions of your property, and then you also are actively farming other portions, you can still apply for the program. I can't remember what the restrictions are, but they said we'll consider it. Now, the town has solar law though,
Yeah,
as you know, that if there's active farm, or if it's farmland, you have to, what is it? You have to find that it doesn't cause a loss of viable
Valuable.
agriculture.
valuable farm.
Mhm,
If that's determined by the ag committee, then
mhm.
does not qualify as solar.
Which, as you know, it has gone both ways.
So maybe that would be the out, because a lot of the PDRs probably have very prime soil.
They
Wouldn't
do.
qualify under our regulations for solar.
Yeah,
Okay.
the old rules, all of our existing purple ones, these PDRs, I think it was as long as it somewhere, it wasn't 75% minimum of prime soils, but it was more than 50. I think it was somewhere in there that it had to. With the new rules, some of it is a lot higher. Some of it's like 60+%. It depends on what type of farming they're doing. There's like 6 different pages of different criteria categories now. It's, you know, some of them it's vineyard, some of it is agroforestry, some of it is other, which is basically all the crop farmers. Some of it's livestock, some of it's a horse farm. And then there's some that are specific for source water protection. They don't care what you're farming on it, but if you're farming and you're in an area, they call it source water area, which we don't have a lot of them, but they'll work with you on those too.
And do they provide criteria to quantify that?
And we have all the data we need.
Someone has nothing to do with the state of New York.
Change the rules.
Your taxes don't work.
So I do regret that this is so kind of open-ended, but it's just the nature of the beast, you know, we know what we want our ultimate goal to be is to protect the most valuable places in the town according to maps like that one, but not only that one, because again, that one ignores all the small parcels. So you can see like Menteith Creek, none of that is blue. It's all yellow and green, but it's really important. So maps like that, but also just things that we know, you know, streams are important. Most of the ones in the town lead to Canandaigua Lake, so they're important for water quality. So land around that's also important. So we know we want to protect land. We just need a better way to get there than this just haphazard way we've been doing it. I will say with farming, we have, you know, we have had good plans and we kind of have done decently at doing it. But with non-farm open space, I feel like we've just been kind of wandering around doing the best we can. And if this group, if we can come up with a plan, and maybe it is something like this. These are the programs you have available to you as a landowner. But I would hope that maybe we could actually develop some internal program too, some kind of in-house program where we can work directly with the landowner without having to depend on grants so much.
Is there a number of acreage that we would, is there a minimum and maximum acreage that is considered for this?
I don't know, because sometimes even a small parcel might be important. So, you know, the town's looking to purchase land next to McJanet Park. It's only 7 acres, but it's forested. It has a gorge on it. Barnes Gully runs right through it. It sits between the Canandaigua Vista project and Ononda Park. So it could one day help us connect the two via a trail. But it's not a big parcel when talking about, you know, land preservation. So I don't know if we would want a minimum, because would that restrict us?
Well, we, the town were offered, I'm trying to think of the guy's name. You remember, Chuck? off of North Road, I think it was, or one of those, he wanted to give the town
Oh, yeah.
6 or
Mr.
8
Dewey.
Yeah,
acres,
they're on it.
and the
Bill
town
Dewey?
didn't want to bother with it.
Yeah,
Dewey, Bill Dewey, I think his name was. He was
Maybe.
off of like County Road 28.
yeah.
Yeah.
Can't remember.
So the cost of doing that and the hassle of
I think-
monitoring the easement, was it worth the
No,
trouble?
and I think, there's other factors we would want to consider, so size, yes, but what's on it and where is it? So this 7-acre parcel off of State Route 21 had so many other things going on around it and near it, and so many other pieces that made it very worthwhile. But
Your small places could also be those connectors
yeah.
because it's fragmented for wildlife.
Yes, so one of the maps I'd like to have us print larger for this room that we have, but I don't have it anywhere large, is our wildlife corridor map. That was part of what Labella Associates did for us with our open space master plan, and then also more recently with our natural resources inventory, which I encourage you guys to look at, wander through those plans. If you don't know where they are, I can tell you where to find them. As an ECB member, you should have a copy of the NRI. If you don't, I can get you one. And the open space plan, but for the rest of us, we have all of those on our website. But that map is something that's worth looking at too, because yes, maybe it's a tiny parcel, but maybe it retains a link that if that disappeared, we'd be sorry to see it go.
So if I'm hearing everything correctly, it would be nice to have something in-house, something local,
Mhm.
something more user-friendly, where landowners won't have to, I'm looking at it from their perspective, show an interest, take an active interest, invest some time and effort, only to understand the state regulations have changed, and thank you, but we'll
Exactly.
drop next year.
Which is what happened a couple of years ago, and
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that was another one of these pushes. It's like, well, now what? We have nothing else we can offer them because we don't have enough money to take the place of the state program for them, or at least there's no plan for that in place, We could offer them something small, but it wouldn't result in enough financial incentive for them to even be willing to consider it.
Sarah, would this be bound by existing revenues, or is this something that could become something as large as a public referendum to raise new revenues? I know that's not something most people want to hear.
Good luck. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck.
At this point, I just want to see that if we can come up with something we can suggest, maybe it is something like that. Who knows? At the end of the day, does the town board agree with what we come up with?
I think if you create an open space funding district, you're gonna have to run that by them.
Yeah.
Because would you be willing to pay?
Well, like what
assessment?
Tom said, though, would you consider splitting what they make?
On
The
the,
$1,000,
On the park and rec fee?
so you could split it, so
Or-
one's open.
Or create an
Increase it-
additional one
Increase it and split it.
and have a second one that's for open space.
And
Start saving.
I guess that would be up to the town board. The pushback we always get, or the town gets, is that you're dinging the new folks. Are,
It'll go into the price of the home.
why
Right.
am I paying when the rest of the folks aren't kicking in?
Right,
So if
they
we
didn't
had a
have to.
conservation district where everybody kicked in, everybody enjoyed the benefit of that
I see.
lot next to you being empty instead of another housing development.
But that's pretty much typical, most municipalities.
For sure.
They have that fee that they charge for new
For parks,
development,
for parks and rec,
for
yeah,
Parks and Rec,
but
right?
not for open space.
I think
Oh,
the
I
people
see
who are
what you're
most
saying.
conscious of losing open
And-
space
and
are the
The state's
residents.
so
Who live here?
rigid on what you can use it
Yeah,
for.
right.
People come to me,
Yes,
it's the last man in concept. I'm here,
when
I
we
don't know
do
anybody
these
else.
sorts of, these big strategic planning, when we send out surveys, the majority of people always come back and say that, we want you to you know, we live here because it's beautiful and there's open spaces and so forth. Protect that, protect the water quality in Canandaigua Lake, protect farmland, preserve natural resources. So people say they're interested in doing it. I think there'd be enough
But
support. But
Ask them to pay for it. I'm thinking of the library. in
Some of
Victor.
them,
Yeah,
Just thinking the same thing.
some of them will and some of them really aren't gonna want to.
some people just vote against any tax, whether it's
I know.
school budget or a library.
And it's really short-sighted
Well,
because,
But
you
there are
know,
people out there
everything of
caring.
benefit to the community is part of our taxation, you know?
People get mad when their views ruined by a new housing development next to them. But it's easier to get mad about what already happened than it is to
Right.
pay for prevention.
Mhm.
Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
be cognizant of our time. It's 10:50. As you can see, there's a lot to talk about here. I was kind of thinking before we go today, I'd like to set up a recurring meeting schedule and then plan on topics for meetings. There's a lot to talk about. If we can focus a conversation in each meeting, you know, about some of these individual topics. I don't know, what do you think? Does that sound reasonable? Because, you know, each individual conversation on each of these topics we talked about today could take up a whole meeting easily. And I know the first few meetings is probably gonna be learning about what's out there and stuff, but eventually, you know, maybe we can focus on actually starting to develop some ideas, but as far as the schedule goes, obviously, I work during the day. I'd prefer that we keep it during the day if that works for other people. And we have some restrictions on certain days of the week based on other meetings that happen. This room really would be ideal because of all the maps, but does this time generally work for everybody?
How many people that you invited weren't able to make it here
A few.
today?
A few.
Is
I didn't
it-
hear
Is it
from
a
some
unique
people also.
situation or might they be able to?
So there was someone I invited who maybe wouldn't want to sit in on the team, but maybe wants to keep abreast of it. He's one of our arborists on our tree team. He'll never be able to come to this time of day, but I'm not sure he wanted to be an active member anyway. So I did have a
Okay.
couple people like that.
I had to take time off work.
Yeah, so I guess I want to hear from the majority of you, what times don't work?
I'm free.
Mondays are always good for me.
And time of day doesn't matter. I know for you, you said it does. What times would work better for you?
Well, if it's gonna be daytime, then then I need to take the time off work, which if we're talking, only like a couple times a month, that's okay.
I think once a month
Okay.
is probably a good target for about an hour. If we need to change that in the future, that's fine, but typically that's what we start with most of our groups.
Sure. Mondays are less than ideal for me, because
Okay.
that's, that's doing payroll and all that kind of
I-
stuff for everybody.
We typically do any Monday through Friday, any day of the week.
How about Tuesday after CIC?
And it would be like
So
10 or 11, 10:30.
10?
isn't there economic development after CIC?
They haven't met in months. and
I'm not a
months.
member of that committee.
I am, and I don't even remember the last
When
time
did
we
we-
met. Yeah, what days are best? So if we don't want to do Mondays, does any other day work better or worse for anyone?
Friday's real good for me, but I can be flexible most of the time.
We don't have any other standing meetings on Friday mornings.
Fridays are okay with me too, as long as it's not.
How about Friday afternoons after?
No,
Just before happy hour.
Housing.
I
Yeah,
think people showing up might be questionable on a Friday afternoon.
you're right. You're
Yeah.
right.
Friday mornings
Friday
are
morning?
okay. Don't listen to them.
That's okay for you?
That sounds,
As
yes.
long as it
perfect.
sticks with once a month.
Mhm.
And if mornings, if we want to have an evening meeting occasionally, that's fine too. I just think on a regular basis, it would be difficult for me to be available.
Mhm. Well, and if we keep the Zoom option open too.
We will always be able to have the Zoom.
Yeah.
Obviously, no one came today, but it's recorded.
Yep.
And that'll always be available.
And is Edith a member of this?
She's supposed to be.
Okay, because she's a good resource.
Yeah, there's a couple people who
Edith
said they
Davis.
wanted
Edith
to, who
Davis.
didn't come that I didn't hear from. So I don't
Okay.
know why they didn't come.
Okay.
But yes, and I think she's typically available during the day. She has come to daytime meetings before,
She's still juggling grandkids.
probably. Mhm. Oh, and for those of you who don't know, we have two members of our Environmental Conservation Board here with us today. Edith is another member. And their group is responsible for reviewing applications and their impact or potential impact on our natural resources. And they provide that feedback to the planning board and to our zoning board. They also sometimes will organize workshops and stuff like that. In the past, they did like a forest management workshop and invited a master forester to come, things like that. So,
The only Friday you have to watch is we planning public works.
that's right. That is
That
the
Friday after the
first and or,
Monday after
it's
the second
sometimes the
month.
first Friday, sometimes it's the second Friday.
Okay. So just as long as you work around that, that's the only conflict I have, Fridays.
What about third Fridays at 10?
That works.
I'll have to check the long-term schedule to see. And as an alternate, and if for some reason Fridays aren't good, is Tuesdays generally okay?
What day?
Tuesdays,
I can't do any Thursday mornings.
Tuesday.
Tuesday, did you say? Tuesday.
or Wednesday. I mean, really,
I
just
can't
want
do the
another-
first, third, or second, or third
Okay.
Tuesday,
What a Wednesday,
unless it's after the CIC meeting.
which it would be.
Then
it
I
would
can
just
do
have to
it.
be bumped. Okay, so we'll shoot for Fridays.
I won't be here the next Friday. I'll be in
Yes, we're going
Alaska.
to Alaska. And most likely like the third Fridays, and we'll start with an idea of 10 AM.
17.
17.
Mhm.
After you've cleared it, just send us out a note.
Yeah, we can choose. And for the Zoom, I'll create one that's recurring. It won't be the same as the one for today, but going forward, it would stay the same. You could just save it. And it would just repeat for every month so that way no one has to try and do different Zoom links all the time. What do we want to focus on for our next one? Would it be helpful if we reviewed existing programs first?
Probably good idea for everybody up to speed.
Focus on the things that the town has actively participated in the past.
Yeah, like the process
Mhm.
that the landowner has to go
Okay.
through. And that the town has to do to support it.
For those kinds of conversations, we'll end up focusing on the PDR program. This is the one we've done the most. We've either worked with the land trust on it or done it ourselves. It's the one I'm most familiar with. Actually, it's the only one we have.
And while we're talking about the land trust, I encourage everybody here to either join the Finger Lakes Land Trust or go online. I think it's FLLT.org or some.
FLLT.org, yes.
And there's a woods walk. I think Andy Zepp is going to do it at the-
Marty Dodge or
at
something.
the Vista in mid-June sometime.
I think the Canada Lake Watershed Association put out a bunch of events coming up this month, and one of them was a walk with Marty Dodge too.
Oh, well, maybe, I don't know, the picture showed Andy Zepp.
Did it?
doing
Okay, yeah.
But it could be Marty Dodge.
Marty Dodge lives next to the Canada Vista property, and he's been friends with the owners who had it before for, I don't know, decades, and has helped manage their trails. So there's a wealth of information there too. Yeah, the land trust is amazing. Actually, one of the members of this team is Max Heitner, who works with the land trust. I think he's I can't remember what his title is, but he's one of my main contacts at the land trust. He works with the easements and those programs and specifically. He isn't going to be coming to our meetings regularly, but he's gonna be receiving all the emails that you guys get. And when we need him, or if it's something specific to the land trust, he'll be available and he may come via Zoom or answer questions. And if we have a need of something that they can provide as far as feedback or guidance, he's going to be available to us. He's kind of been an off and on member of this group for the last few years, and he's come and talked to us before, as has Andy Zapp, the director. It's a really great organization. They're doing a lot of work in the town. Some of it a little under the radar, but they've got their long-term planning. They have, like we talked about, they do have a list of parcels. They know the ones they want. And they start talking with landowners, and sometimes it's a years-long process. So, that goes into it. When the landowner's ready, they have a plan in place.
Is that public information or is it usually
Sometimes
discretionary?
I hear about it after it's happened, and they'll
Okay.
say, we started working with this landowner years
Because
ago.
that would help when we look at this map, say, okay, which ones are you targeting?
And they
We can know
do, there is a lot of back
That's on
and
their hit
forth.
list.
They know usually what we're working on.
Mhm.
And they sometimes reach out to us, like with the Vista project.
Yep.
They said, hey, we want your help. Will you help us do this?
It'd be interesting to learn a bit more about their presentations.
How they go
Their,
about it.
some of those soft skills involved in dialoguing with landowners, what works, what doesn't.
Andy is very smooth.
Mhm.
Would a
They get
future
donations.
meeting
Yes.
with them to come and talk
I
about
think
that?
would be good, yeah.
Maybe I
Yeah,
can try and
that'd
get
be
that for July. See if either via Zoom or in person, either Max or Andy or both might be willing to talk to us about that.
Yeah, we help each other.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Talk to
they're good people.
Be interesting to hear from someone who has a PDR and what drove them to participate in the program and
How it's working,
Right.
Mhm.
and how it's working for them.
yeah,
Yeah, it might be fun to hear from one of the newer ones and one of the ones who's had it for a long time, like the Weifels farm. Oops, the
a
Hicks
great
farm
idea.
is the oldest
What
one.
worked, what didn't work, yeah, and then we can use that
Yeah,
information.
this one down at the lower end is our oldest one. That's the Hicks farm. It's a vineyard. I think that was 2009.
I remember that.
And then the Weifels was the next oldest, I think. And then these are more recent.
The Bronco Bank, I went to that one. That was really interesting. The whole presentation and everyone speaking.
Yeah, and of course, the most recent ones are over here. Those strikers, they own, they're a farming family that's been around for a little while, and I can't remember, I think it was almost 600 acres, several parcels kind of in here. And then this one up here is the Purdy's, that's 185 acres, they're the most recent one. So yeah, that's a good
that's
idea
nice.
too.
And I know, Sarah, you and Shauna make the offer of conservation subdivision to someone who maybe isn't looking to do a PDR or something where it's,
Right,
you're reserving all the property. In the
yeah,
case of a
they say, no,
conservation,
I'm
you might get
sold, I really
70%
wanna,
of it.
yeah,
Pierce Brook, that was about 70% is going to be a conservation easement, 30% is going to be developed, so.
yeah.
Something's better than nothing.
Exactly, and that's something I always, it's not all or nothing. It can't be.
Mhm. No.
And we don't want to be, as a town, I feel like as a town, we don't want to do that to landowners. We're not here to take away landowners' rights. We just want to preserve what we can while we still can, but not in a way where we're trying to take anything away from it.
Well, if the developer really wants a high density development, it behooves them to.
Yeah, they can't use
have
underlying
a
zoning for it unless
conservation
they're
easement.
in Uptown.
Yeah,
It's
and
underlying
you gotta be on
zoning.
sewer and water.
Exactly.
But I forget what the percentage is, but the percentage of open land that's what they call vacant as opposed to farmland is greater than farmland in the town of Canandaigua. Vacant land, and that's unfortunately is what's valuable to the developer.
We have that study from, what was it, develop? The conservation easement subdivision,
Mhm.
Conservation subdivision.
conservation subdivision. Might be interesting for, it's in my folder that's on my
The,
kitchen counter.
To look at the actual law, the language.
Yeah,
Yeah, so why don't I send out, so you know, I talked about how a lot of this is on our website. Would it be helpful if I sent an email that just contained all the places you can go to look at these things? So like our the recent conservation subdivision law, I think that was last year, or
Last year. yeah.
was it last year or 2020? No, last year. It finished last year.
Yeah. And I think what Karen's talking about is the Bella study that led to that ordinance,
This guy
the
here.
conservation.
Yeah, but the only thing they gave us in the end was the language for the law. There
Yeah.
wasn't a real study, but the studies
Thought
they
Barb
did,
went through it. Yeah, okay.
she did, but the end result
Okay.
really was but related to that is our open space master plan and the natural resources inventory. Those two really played a big part of their revision.
Mhm.
We have a page on the website for the team.
This team does have its own page, yes. But mostly it talks about what the group has done in the past. This report from 2015 is on there.
I was just thinking it would be a nice place for the links.
Yes, however, most of those links already exist on our main page that has all of our studies. So I don't know if I need to redo it. Why don't I do that? I'll send you guys an email that'll show you where you can go get all that stuff. Most of it is in one spot on our website where we have all of our planning documents. But the actual language for conservation subdivision is, I can send that as probably as a PDF because it's on we have a website for our laws, but nobody wants to look through that to find it.
you got it.
It's easier just to download it and give it to you.
Tried to simplify it, didn't we?
We tried, that's better, much better. Oh, gosh. The old one was terrible. Well, the NRI.
Yes,
Has really made it, because they're, now you know what the constraints are.
it's right.
Before, it was,
It's
what are the
wonderful.
constraints? And you'd argue with the developer, is that a constraint? I don't know, well, my opinion, it's not. Yeah. Well, if you look at the NRI, and you look at the map. You gotta prove to us that it's not. That's good. That's good.
Thank you again, everybody. I'm sorry I talk so much. We appreciate you coming to listen.
Someone's gotta lead us.
I will send an email that'll give you all the information that you could spend hours looking through if you so choose.
Goody.
Yeah, nothing else to do.
Don't be false.
And I'll send another email with a Zoom link and the dates of the next meeting a little bit later. I'll keep them separate so it's not so busy. I appreciate all of you coming. I really do, and all of your feedback. And I don't have a date in mind for when we have something we can present because there's so much. I'm not really sure. We'll kind of have to see how things go.
But that is our final goal.
Our final goal is to make recommendations. If it's beyond something like this, then yeah, make recommendations to the town board to change our code to fund the open space plan or, something like that. Yeah. Something more solid, create some sort of internal program and some sort of packet we can present to people who are interested.
I will say that I was surprised that there's $1.3 million, because back when that was done, I think we only had
It was like
$300,000 or
$400,000.
$400,000. So the town board has somehow
They have been
found
putting money
surplus
into
funds
it.
to toss into
Yeah.
that.
Some of it,
Unfortunately, $1 million is going to go.
it's
very
gonna
far.
go fast, yeah.
That's
Some of
true.
it was put in there when there was anticipation of potential land acquisition a couple of years ago. That didn't happen.
Yeah.
But
So can you use open space fund to fund a parks purchase?
I think you could. But the
It
park
doesn't
fund,
go
the
like
other
that.
way
You can't do
around.
it the other way.
no, the park fund's big. I mean, and that's what it's there for. So I don't think you would want to at this point. I'm not sure though. Again, the parcel that they're looking at most recently, I don't know where that money's gonna come out of, whether it's gonna be open space or parks.
And it doesn't have to be right on the lake, right? Those are up
Correct.
north of
We
farmland,
have
so.
different types of ecological communities all over the town that, each has their own value. Naturally, land near the lake is important for protecting water quality. But most of it is homes. So the next best thing if we're talking water is anything along streams, forests, keep them forested, because if you take away the trees, the soil goes away and it ends up in the lake.
Yes, it does.
It's tough talking to an old person about giving up their land.
Yeah. Well, and it's not
On the
always
other
that.
hand, an old person that likes their land may want to give it to the town so that it doesn't get developed.
Or sell
I'll
it.
let you talk to us.
Depends on how you word it, right? You
Right.
gotta have a good presentation
Right.
to it.
Or if there's land for sale, I mean, we're trying to purchase the 7 acres. There's no talk of easements there. It's just
Well,
a
I
separate
guess
buy it
everybody
outright.
has a
And that
different
way we can
reason
have it
for
protected
considering.
our way.
Right.
So
We
that-
tried to do that. They were selling it.
Sometimes there's a secession.
Wonderful.
I think it used to be farmland, but it butted up to our
The kids take it
property.
over fine.
But
Yeah.
it was going to their family, so there's gonna be 3 different homes
There.
built.
Kids
but-
want
Is he
2
gonna
acre
go
lots
get it?
subdivided. over.
You
Yep.
take it
Yeah.
On the
as
house.
tax deduction, but you
Okay.
have
But they'll still in the
to
farm.
take
Sure.
earned income.
They want
Doesn't
their
have-
house.
doesn't have a high assessment.
Happens a lot.